The EDUCAS WJEC specification asks us to consider Fletcher's 6 fundamental propositions. It is these that Fletcher claimed were the essence of what situation ethics is. Only one thing is intrinsically good, namely love, nothing else at all. This proposition tells us that only love is valuable in and of itself, independent of any other factors. Legalists claim that commands from God or natural laws, such as the command to preserve life, are intrinsically good, and actions like murder are intrinsically evil. However, Fletcher argues that what makes an act good or evil is whether or not it helps people in the situation, and to say anything else brings us to a contradiction. To say that some acts are intrinsically evil forces a person to do evil in some situations. For example, for the legalist, lying or stealing may be evil, but doing either to protect someone's life may be a lesser evil. This suggests that such acts are still evil and require forgiveness, but yet they are somehow the right thing to do. This makes a false distinction between what is good and what is right. Yet to say they are right puts the legalist in the position of having to say that it is sometimes right to go against a command of God. Fletcher calls this confused, muddled, and contradictory. He says that to lie or steal in such a situation is good. It does not require repentance because it is done in love. Telling the truth is only valuable inasmuch as it loves people, because only love is good. The ruling norm of Christian decision-making is love, nothing else. This proposition demonstrates that for a Christian who must face making a moral decision, the only thing that must never be set aside is the rule to love. Whilst Christians get some illumination from laws in scriptures, there are situations where laws offer no support at all. For example, Fletcher speaks of the command against killing. If this law is absolute, acts like suicide are absolutely forbidden. However, in the instance of Mother Maria, who took the place of a young Jewish girl in the gas chambers of Belsen, it is essentially an example of suicide. She sacrificed her life to save another. So the legalist is forced either to condemn such an action or make exceptions to the rules. Bonhoeffer allowed exceptions to killing if the victim was not innocent, for example in the case of war or capital punishment, and he was involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler, yet would have been forced by his own ethic to leave a man to die painfully if he were trapped in a burning plane wreck pleading to be shot. Fletcher sees love as a distillation of the law, where love has been extracted or filtered out, with the legalistic husks thrown away as rubbish. A Christian can employ law when it is loving to do so, but any commandment can and should be violated if it serves love. Love and justice are the same, for justice is love distributed, nothing else. For Fletcher, love, justice and prudence are not separate virtues. Justice is love fairly shared out. It is love using its head, working out its problems, calculating its duties, resources, obligations and opportunities. Fletcher followed Augustine in saying that love is careful and diligent in serving the neighbour as well as it can. He argues that love must be carefully balanced and thorough in its calculations. This is an intellectual process that allows a Christian to work out how best to distribute love to neighbours. Fletcher recognises that we never have just one neighbour at a time, so fairness requires that love must do all it can and take everything into account. This is a social enterprise rather than an individual one. Fletcher mentions segregation as an example of where people have differentiated wrongly between love and justice. He does not understand how a Christian gospel could preach love while simultaneously withholding justice from black people under segregation laws. Agape must then form a coalition with utilitarianism, replacing their pleasure principle with the agapeic calculus, the greatest amount of love for the greatest number of neighbours. Love wills the neighbour's good, whether we like him or not. The biblical commands not to murder, lie, or steal are all about the relationship we have with other people. To love your neighbour is to show them kindness and fair treatment. In 1 Corinthians 13, St. Paul describes love as being non-preferential. This means that your neighbour is not just the people that you like, it is anyone who needs love. The Gospel tells us that this includes even enemies and strangers. Agape is not emotional, preferential love like philios or eros that we cannot be commanded to feel. Agape, on the other hand, is practical. It's a voluntary decision to act in a benevolent way. It is not simply pleasing people. You would not give heroin to an addict just because they want it. Instead, agape is action for the neighbour's sake, even if they do not deserve it, and even if they are unlovable. It is altruistic and only requires self-love if that would benefit the neighbour. Fletcher gives the example of a ship's captain who should keep himself alive even at the expense of some passengers if it means that the rest of the ship will be brought to safety. This goodwill for others is non-reciprocal and is the Christian requirement for God and humanity as well as between human beings. Only the end justifies the means, nothing else. For Fletcher, the ends are the results of an action. If the consequence is loving, then whatever steps a person has taken to get there are justified. Fletcher says that unless there is a purpose to action, it is simply a meaningless random accident. An act only becomes meaningful because of the purpose it serves. Ends and means are inseparable, and their goodness is relative to each other. However, this does not mean that the situationist can do what they like. Means are the ingredients that should be selected carefully, just as you would select ingredients for a recipe, because they contribute to the final product. The means should be fitting, even proportionate to the ends. An act may sometimes be good and sometimes be evil. It depends upon the situation. Surgeons must sometimes mutilate bodies to save them. Nurses must sometimes lie to some mentally ill patients to calm them for treatment. But in these cases, it is fitting to do so. There is no guilt derived from these acts, only sorrow that there isn't a less tragic circumstance. There are 4 factors involved in moral decision-making: the ends, the means, the motive, and the foreseeable consequence. All of these should be balanced on love's scales. There are lots of ends that might be had for ethical actions, but the only end that is good in itself is love. Love's decisions are made situationally, not prescriptively. Many people want prefabricated morality because they can lean on it for strong, unyielding rules. It gives comfort and security, whereas conscience is a burden. Moving from law to love is a risk, full of the anguish of decision-making. But the law cannot dictate moral decisions with generalizations or abstractions. This would not produce a loving result, because moral decisions concern a living reality and situations change. Fletcher gives the example of a pregnant woman in Arizona who was told her child might be affected by a drug called thalidomide that had been prescribed to help her with extreme sickness. The doctors advised abortion, but the law generalized that abortion was wrong. In court, the judge denied her appeal. Eventually, her husband took her to Sweden, where the abortion was carried out and the baby was found to be very badly deformed. Fletcher declares that this would have been a loving decision even if the baby had turned out to be unaffected. It was risky, but responsible in the moment of decision. Acts are only right because, when, or whilst they are loving. Situation ethics takes as full account as possible of the context or environment of every moral decision. The rights and wrongs of a situation are relative to love, but once the course is chosen, the obligation to pursue it is absolute.